They thought they owned the land. For 15 years, this HOA ran their little empire like tyrants. $500 fines for the wrong shade of mailbox, mandatory landscaping fees. That went straight into the president's pocket, threatening elderly homeowners with liens over grass that was half an inch too tall. They had lawyers, they had power, they had connections at City Hall. What they didn't have was the deed to the land. My grandfather never told them, and when I inherited his entire estate, including the 1,000 acres their precious neighborhood sits on, I realized something beautiful. I wasn't just a landowner. I was their landlord, and rent was about to come due. The lawyer's office smelled like old paper and expensive wood polish. I'd flown in from Seattle for what I thought would be a simple estate settlement, sign some papers, maybe inherit Grandpa's old pickup truck and his fishing cabin. Your grandfather was quite the strategist, Attorney Morrison said, sliding a manila folder across his mahogany desk. He never mentioned any of this to you. Inside was a property survey map. My eyes traced the red boundary lines, and my stomach dropped. The lines didn't just encompass Grandpa's old farmhouse on the hill. They wrapped around an entire development too, 198 homes, a community center, 2 parks, and a golf course that I'd driven past on my way here. This can't be right, I said. That's Willowbrook Estates, that's a whole HOA community. Morrison's smile was thin. Your grandfather owned this land since 1962. In 2009, a developer approached him about building a luxury community. Your grandfather agreed to lease the land for 99 years with specific terms. The developer went bankrupt in 2011, halfway through construction. The HOA bought out development company's assets, but, he paused for effect, they never bought the land lease. They've been operating under the assumption that they owned it outright. I stared at the documents. Ground lease agreement. Annual lease payment $2 million with a 3% annual increase. Last payment received never. They owe me how much? Morrison pulled out a calculator with compounding interest and late fees as specified in the original lease, approximately $18. $7 million. I decided to attend the next HOA meeting, not as the landowner, not yet, just as a curious potential buyer who'd been looking at properties in the area. The Willowbrook Estates Community Center was exactly what you'd expect. Bland beige walls, motivational posters about community standards, and a table of stale cookies that nobody touched. The HOA president, Patricia Morehouse, ran the meeting like a military tribunal. She was maybe 60, with the kind of helmet hair that hadn't moved since 1987, and a pantsuit that screamed, "I need to speak to your manager." Next order of business, Patricia announced, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. The Henderson family at 4782 Maple Ridge Drive has failed to repaint their garage door the approved shade of Navajo white. This is their 3rd violation. I motion we place a lien on their property. An elderly man in the back raised his hand weakly. Patricia, that's my daughter's house. She just had surgery. She's been. Approved colors are non-negotiable, Tom. We all agreed to maintain property values. Motion carries. I watched as she gavelled it through. No discussion, no mercy. Then came the financial report from their treasurer, a nervous man named Dale who kept wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. Our community improvement fund currently holds $340,000, Dale announced. However, I need to address some concerns about the recent expenditures. Those expenditures were approved. Patricia cut him off. The new landscaping at near the north entrance was essential for curb appeal. But Patricia, that's your street. Only your street, and the invoices. Are you questioning my integrity, Dale? The room went silent. Dale sat down. I raised my hand. Hi, sorry, I'm new here, just curious. Who actually owns the land under the community? Patricia's smile was patronizing. The HOA collectively owns all common areas and the land beneath our homes, which is why maintaining standards is so crucial. We have a responsibility to know. Who holds the actual deed, the title? Her expression froze for just a second. That's handled through our management company, complex real estate structures, nothing for residents to worry about. She moved on quickly, but I'd seen it, that flicker of uncertainty. I spent the next week digging. Every document my grandfather had kept, every filing at the county recorder's office, every piece of correspondence. The story that emerged was calculated and beautiful. My grandfather, Samuel Chen, had been a farmer. But he'd also been sharp. When developers started circling in the 2000s, offering to buy his 1,000 acres, he'd refused. Land is the only thing they're not making more of, he used to say. But Raymond Blackwell, the developer, had been persuasive. He'd offered a 99-year ground lease with annual payments that would set up my grandfather and his descendants for life. The lease had ironclad terms. Payments were due January 1st every year, with compounding daily interest at 8% for late payments. After 60 days of non-payment, the landowner could terminate the lease and reclaim all structures. Grandpa had been careful. He'd hired 3 different law firms to review everything. Blackwell's company, Prestige Communities, had built 148 homes before the 2008 financial crisis destroyed them. The HOA, newly formed and desperate to maintain their property values, had purchased Prestige's remaining assets in a bankruptcy auction for $3 million. The model homes, the community center, the landscaping contracts. But nobody had purchased the ground lease. It had simply been forgotten, lost in bankruptcy proceedings, and my grandfather, who'd never received a single payment, had waited. I found a letter he'd written to Prestige Communities in 2012 demanding payment. They'd gone bankrupt. He'd written to the HOA in 2014. They'd responded that they had no record of any ground lease and suggested he was confused. My grandfather hadn't been confused. He'd been patient. And he'd kept every piece of documentation in a fireproof safe. I called an emergency HOA meeting as a concerned potential investor. I had the right under their bylaws. The community center was packed. Word had spread that someone might be causing trouble for Patricia's regime, and people were curious. I stood at the podium with my briefcase. Thank you all for coming. My name is James Chen. I'm here because I've discovered something interesting about Willowbrook Estates, something that affects every single one of you. Patricia tried to interrupt. This is highly irregular. I've discovered that none of you own the land your homes are built on. The room erupted, voices overlapping, confusion, anger. I raised my hand for quiet. In 2009, the original owner of this land, my grandfather, Samuel Chen, leased this property to a developer. That developer went bankrupt. Your HOA purchased the developer's assets but not the land lease. For the past 14 years, you've been occupying land you don't own, and you haven't made a single lease payment. Patricia's face had gone from pink to white. That's absurd. Our lawyers would have. Your lawyers never checked. Why would they? The developer told everyone he owned the land. It was only a lease, and leases don't always show up in standard title searches if they're not recorded properly, which this one wasn't initially. I opened my briefcase and began distributing copies of the ground lease. The annual lease payment is $2 million. With compounding interest and late fees over 14 years, you collectively owe approximately $7 million. You're also in violation of several lease terms regarding property maintenance and unauthorized subleasing. Dale, the treasurer, was reading his copy with growing horror. Patricia, did you know about this? Of course not. This is some kind of scam. It's not a scam, I said calmly. Everything's been recorded with the county as of this morning. You can verify it yourselves. But here's what's really interesting. According to the lease terms, I have the right to terminate the agreement due to non-payment and reclaim all structures on the property as compensation for damages. Someone in the back shouted, "You can't just take our homes." Actually, I can. You built them on my land without proper payment, but I'm not here to do that. I'm here to offer a solution. Patricia tried to lawyer up. 3 different law firms reviewed the documents and told her the same thing. The lease was airtight. My grandfather had been meticulous. The HOA was legally squatting on my property, but I'd done my homework too. Taking 298 homes would be a legal nightmare, even if I had the right. Bad publicity, years of litigation, and honestly, most of these people were innocent. They'd bought homes in good faith. No, I had a better plan. I called another meeting, this time with my own lawyer present. Here's my offer, I announced. I'm willing to restructure the ground lease. Instead of $7 million in back payments, I'll settle for $5 million to be paid from HOA funds and through a one-time special assessment of €8,000 per household. The room exploded again. $8,000 was a lot, but it was manageable compared to losing their homes. In addition, going forward, the HOA will pay me €150,000 annually in lease payments, which will be added to your HOA dues as approximately $500 per household per year. That's extortion, Patricia shrieked. No, my lawyer said calmly, that's 87% below market rate for ground lease in this area. Mr. Chen is being extraordinarily generous. The alternative is lease termination and eviction proceedings against 298 households. I wasn't done. There's one more condition. I've reviewed the HOA financial records, which, as landowner, I'm entitled to see. Patricia, you've been embezzling community funds for 6 years. The landscaping improvements on your street, paid for with HOA money. The security system upgrades that only went to board members' homes, HOA money. The community vehicle that's actually a Mercedes in your garage, HOA money. Dale was nodding, pulling out his own folder. I've been keeping a separate set of books. I knew something was wrong, but she threatened to ruin my credit if I reported it. I have everything documented. Patricia's lawyer whispered urgently in her ear. She looked like she might throw up. So here's the deal, I continued. Patricia resigns immediately. She pays back $127,000 in embezzled funds. I'm being conservative with that number, and she agrees to never hold HOA office again. In exchange, I don't press criminal charges. The HOA will also undergo immediate reform. No more arbitrary fines. No more liens over paint colors. No more harassment of elderly homeowners who can't keep up with your aesthetic standards. We're going to draft new bylaws together, reasonable ones. Or I terminate the lease, and you can all explain to your mortgage companies why you're being evicted. Patricia resigned that night. Turns out, when faced with prison time, people suddenly become very cooperative. She paid back the money within a week. Apparently, her husband had a very different opinion about her community service. When it meant losing their retirement fund, the HOA voted to accept my terms too, 187 to 11. The 11 who voted against it moved out within 3 months. I worked with the new board, actual reasonable people who just wanted a nice place to live, to rewrite the bylaws. We kept reasonable standards. Maintain your property, don't let your yard become a junkyard, be considerate of neighbors. But we eliminated the petty tyranny. No more approved paint color lists. No more fines for mailboxes that were the wrong shade of brass. No more threatening elderly people over grass height. The Henderson family, whose daughter had been facing a lien while recovering from surgery, sent me a fruit basket. Tom, the elderly man who'd been bullied at that first meeting, started a community garden where Patricia's approved landscaping. Used to be, it's now the most popular spot in the neighborhood. I even invested some of that $5 million settlement into actual community improvements. A real park with playground equipment, solar panels for the community center, and a fund for residents who need help with major repairs. Not charity, loans at 0% interest, because sometimes people just need a break, not a handout. The annual lease payments, I set up a trust. Half goes to maintaining the land and community infrastructure. The other half funds scholarships for local kids whose families can't afford college, something my grandfather would have loved. Patricia tried to sue me 6 months later. Her lawyer withdrew from the case after reading my grandfather's documents. Last I heard, she's working as a lifestyle consultant in Florida, which I assume means she's making someone else's life miserable down there. The neighborhood is thriving now. Property values actually went up once people realized they could paint their doors blue if they wanted to. Turns out, people like living in places where they're treated like adults, not children. I still own the land, and every January 1st, when I receive that lease payment, I think about my grandfather, the farmer who outsmarted an entire development company and gave me the tools to take down a tyrant. He taught me something important. Real power doesn't come from bullying people over paint colors or threatening liens. It comes from owning the ground everyone else is standing on and knowing exactly when to remind them. The deed to 1,000 acres sits in my safe now, right next to Grandpa's old pocket watch and a photo of him standing in his fields. He's smiling in that picture. I like to think he knew exactly what he was setting up. And somewhere, Patricia Morehouse is learning that karma has a property deed, and it's in someone else's name.